It's Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, June 6th, 2025. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. In Los Angeles, I am John Ramey. We have elections in Poland and South Korea, and we have riveting U.S. economic data, including a jobs report and a beige book, Sam Park. And a beige book is something that throughout the course of my life, trying to somewhat monitor the state of the U.S. economy and more specifically covering economic affairs on this podcast. Have we ever talked about the beige book before?
I don't think we ever have, actually. We've focused on more granular economic data, I think, in our discussions thus far.
But it seems as though the beige book was everywhere. We have a jobs report from today, but on Wednesday, the beige book, CNBC reporting, the beige book indicates the U.S. economy has contracted over the past 6 weeks as hiring has slowed and consumers and businesses are worried about tariff-related price increases, according to a Federal Reserve report. In its periodic beige book summary of conditions, the central bank noted that economic activity has declined slightly since the previous report released April 23. So apparently there are beige books coming at us like, pebble-sized meteors going through the night sky. We just haven't noticed them?
Well, I mean, from what I gather, the beige book comes out 8 times a year, and I don't really understand why that. I mean, it's not monthly, it's not, bi-monthly or anything like this. I don't understand why it's only 8 times.
It's Octavian.
Yeah, it's really strange. Well, no, anyway, but. So, and again, it's a very broad overview of the economy. And I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't discussed it, is because it's just sort of, a general outlook on the economy, whereas we usually focus more specifically on monthly data and stuff like this, of which we also have plenty this week. But I think that especially this week, it's helpful to look at something like the beige book, just because the overall data, that is the more granular data, is all over the place. We've got all these sort of conflicting signals that are being sent by different sectors and areas of the economy, that something like the beige book, I think, can actually really come in handy for us this particular week.
It just seems like, for some reason, and this happens in media, and again, it's not like some, smoke-filled meeting where all the heads of media tell reporters what to talk about. The media, in my experience as a member of the media, just has this great herd mentality. And sometimes it's on great display like this. Like everybody's breathless about this beige book.
Yes, exactly. Right. I mean, and I think it's, again, because economic issues, as we've discussed many times, they can be difficult to understand. Right. There's
boring.
Yes, there's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of math, right? People's eyes tend to glaze over. As our listeners have heard me say before, if you're ever having trouble sleeping, get an economics textbook. It'll fix that right up for you. But again, we've got the jobs report. We've got consumer confidence data that's coming out all the time. Right. And so I think it helps people in the media to have something very broad like the beige book in times such as these.
Right. Because we have so many different data points, and because of the bewildering actions of this administration on the economic front, it's harder to draw a trend line given kind of the individual inputs. Right. For example, this jobs report, hiring decreased just slightly in May, even as consumers and companies braced against tariffs and a potentially slowing economy. This is CNBC. Non-farm payrolls rose 139,000 for the month. So that's 139,000 jobs added. That's above the muted Dow Jones estimate. Again, that's CNBC, of 125,000. Unemployment rate holding steady at 4.2%. Worker pay grew more than expected. Average hourly earnings up 0.4% during the month, and almost 4% from a year ago. And the forecasts were for an increase of 0.3% and an increase of 3.7% from a year ago. So the jobs report, not disastrous.
No. I think that, again, it almost seems like a replay of the sort of 2022 or so Biden economy, right? Where people were predicting a recession.
Well, there's going to be a recession.
Yeah, but it never happened, right? And in the employment sphere, right? Jobs held up much better than people thought they were going to during this period, as just as much as they did then. And as we've been talking a lot recently about the Trump administration's economic policies and how they're bad for the economy in general terms. And that's true. We've talked a little bit, and maybe a little bit less than we should have, about just how strong the American economy is, right? I mean, it just takes a lot to really knock the American economy back in a very substantial way. And I think this is just another example of that same phenomenon. Again, very much as it was during the Biden administration.
And one thing we have in common with regard to economic policy that extends from survives the Biden administration is the head of the Fed.
Yeah.
So in some sense, the soft landing is still, or a soft landing. Are we still in the landing zone?
I think we've basically just landed. We're just kind of sitting, sort of taxiing down the runway, and everything just is generally okay. Now, there's still warning signs, though, in this jobs report. It's not a blockbuster jobs report, right? It's 139,000 jobs. That's adding jobs. There's no two ways about that. But it's not, hiring by the ton. And there's still a lot of uncertainty, as people keep talking about. And that's, again, one of the reasons why people like to look at things like the Beige book, just to get a broad overview. But if you look at where the jobs were added, it's all in things like healthcare, hospitality, and stuff like this, right? Not industry.
Not manufacturing?
No, it's certainly not in manufacturing. And I don't think that there's any reason to expect that there will be. It's not in things like retail sales. And again, there's no reason to think that there are going to be. I saw a fellow on CNN just now who was saying that this is actually the worst job market in many years for recent college graduates.
I've seen a lot of reporting on that.
Yeah, for people just entering the job market. And he was saying that this is because these are exactly the kind of jobs that are increasingly being done by artificial intelligence programs.
Entry-level white-collar jobs are being vacuumed up by AI.
Yes, and so he was saying, and I think this is probably right, that, and again, there's plenty of people saying this, that places, that areas like healthcare especially, right, are going to be attracting more of these recent college graduates than they have in the past, just because it's one of healthcare especially, it's one of the areas that is just going to keep on adding jobs as the population of the United States continues to age over the next few years.
And as it continues to be about 19% of GDP, it's a profitable industry.
Yes, exactly.
Anything else on the economic data, or can we plunge face first into Poland and South Korea?
I think we should go to Poland and South Korea because there's a lot in both places, especially Poland.
Okay. Dateline Warsaw. The Associated Press reports conservative Karol Nawrocki's victory in Poland's weekend presidential runoff has set the country on a more nationalist course. I don't know about AP's conjugation there. Let's try it again. Conservative Karol Nawrocki's victory in Poland's weekend presidential runoff has set the country on a more nationalist course and cast doubt on the viability of the centrist government of Prime Minister Donald Tusk after the defeat of his liberal allies. So important to note, Poland is run by the prime minister.
Yes.
And his liberal ally running for president just lost to a conservative.
Yes, very narrowly, by the way.
Right. So Nawrocki, who was supported by Donald Trump, won just under 51% of the votes in a very tight race against Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski. He received 49.1%, according to the final results of Sunday's runoff published Monday morning. By evening, Tusk, the prime minister, said he would ask Parliament to hold a vote of confidence in his coalition government, a fragile multi-party alliance that includes left-wingers, centrists, and agrarian conservatives. Tusk's government, that is the prime minister, exists separately from the presidency, but the president holds veto power. And Nawrocki's win will make it extremely difficult for Tusk to press his pro-European agenda. The race revealed deep divisions in the country along the eastern flank of NATO and the European Union. That is the Associated Press reporting. What does this mean for Poland? Is this just like Bill Clinton losing in 1994, the midterms, or his majority in Congress, or Barack Obama losing the midterms in 2010, or is this more severe?
No, it is more severe, especially if Tusk does follow through and asks for the vote of no confidence, right? Which I think was a pretty bold maneuver, frankly, because if his government loses that vote, then they'll have to have another election. We covered their last election in which Tusk won in 2023, just a couple of years ago. And since then, the outgoing president, Andrzej Duda, who is also a very nationalist conservative type figure, has been vetoing legislation right away, right and left. He's vetoed at least a dozen bills. And it's been very difficult for the Tusk government, that is the civic coalition government, to pass any of the reforms that they very much want to pass and had promised on the campaign trail in 2023. And so if Tusk loses the vote of confidence, they'll have to have another election.
I do kind of like this system, though, right? Like, oh, we're not going to waste everybody's time here. If you guys don't want a pro-European agenda because you've just elected a Trumpy nationalist, well, then let's have it out. You want a different parliament?
I'm less fond of the system, I think, than you are. I think that if you have a parliamentary system, you should just have one.
I see what you mean, as opposed to the presidency having veto.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, now, to be fair, the president is directly elected. And so, it's not like there's no case to be made that the president should have some sort of powers in the government. But there's plenty of functioning parliamentary systems in Europe, especially, that have no such powers attached to the presidency. We can think of Germany or Italy or what have you, right? Or Great Britain, for that matter, right? There's no...
the monarch being the president in Great Britain.
The head of state, that is, yes. And so there's no special reason why the president should have that much power in a parliamentary system.
Is this our first world leader? I'm surprised this didn't come up in 2023 regarding Tusk. Is that our first world leader we've covered named for a Fleetwood Mac record?
Well, there are rumors to that effect, but
that's good. Sorry, I had to.
I don't think you did, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I had to reciprocate, mind you. Once you opened the door, I did have to.
Naturally, yeah. It's like Trump and Elon. Why does Poland matter so much? Why do all the smart people who care about foreign policy fixate on Poland?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's right on the border of Ukraine, and it is the largest nation that shares a border with Ukraine. And I think we did an entire episode about Poland a couple of years back when they had that election. And Poland has always been an enormously pivotal player in European politics for more than 100 years. And so it's very large country, and I think it's 40 million people or so. It's got one of the best performing economies in Europe right now, especially. I believe it has the largest military in Europe, in NATO, that is. And so, especially right now, not just historically, what happens in Poland is very important. Now, as we discussed in our All Poland All the Time episode, neither Nawrocki or Trzaskowski is all that pro-Russian. In fact, there are further right parties in Poland that are explicitly pro-Putin. But you really just can't be a Polish nationalist and also be pro-Vladimir Putin, right? It's just anathema.
It's surprising to me that there are even smaller parties with any kind of purchase on the voting public that are pro-Russian given the history.
Well, again, they are very small, right? It's difficult for them to command any large segment of the electorate, and we should be thankful for that. But
Yeah,
still,
but that would be like having loyalists to the British Crown parties in the United States or something.
well,
today.
they're, I mean, don't say never, John. But for instance, Novrotsky still doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO, right? And he doesn't want Poland to provide all that much in the way of military aid. I don't think he's against the military buildup in Poland, which is part of their economic performance, right? But he thinks that should just be used to defend Poland, not to defend any other nation, because, of course, he's a Polish nationalist.
So basically, the idea is Russia, do what you want with Ukraine. Don't pick on us.
I think it's more in that direction, certainly. I mean, Donald Tusk and Truskowski were very pro-European. That is,
Right.
pro-European Union. And like many of the right-wing nationalist parties in Europe, a large point of contention is the role of the European Union, right, which they view as sort of a surrender of independent national sovereignty.
Especially if you're Poland and you think your economy's doing just fine.
Yes, but that wasn't always the case. I mean, Poland
Right.
has
Right.
done very well out of being in the European Union, and they will continue to do so. Most of the sort of anti-EU rhetoric that you hear out of right-wing nationalists in Europe is really just
Immigration.
talk, right?
Yeah.
They don't, well, there's a lot about immigration,
Yeah.
certainly, but they have no intention of leaving the European Union because they've seen what happens when
Right. Yeah. When your nationalist right wingers get your way, you get Brexit.
Yeah, and that nobody
It's a
wants.
cautionary tale.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else we should discuss about Poland?
Nothing right now. I mean, we'll see if the no confidence vote goes through and how it turns out. But this is very important. Now, I should say that that this echoes the election that took place a little while ago in Romania, right?
Yeah.
In which it was.
But it's more important, and that's why I asked, because Poland's a bigger deal than Romania.
It is in some ways, but for instance, the Romania election turned out to be a much more, first of all, the pro-EU candidate won in that election. It was postponed because of supposed Russian interference in November when it was supposed to be held. The first round actually was held. The court overturned it, and they delayed the election until this spring. And so not only did the pro-EU candidate win, but Romania is more important in the Ukraine conflict just for one reason, and that's because it is a littoral state of the Black Sea, and it's along the Romanian coastline that Ukraine has been able to export all its grain and maintain its economic lifeline. So just in that one respect, which I would say is a very important respect, the Romanian election was very important and perhaps as important as the Polish election.
To South Korea. BBC reporting, just hours after winning the South Korean presidency, Lee Jae-myung has pledged to, quote, unite the people in his inauguration speech on Wednesday. The 61-year-old won a snap election by 49.4%, a clear rejection of his rival, Kim Moon-soo, who came from the same party as impeached and, I would say, disgraced President Yoon Suk-yeol. Yoon, everybody will recall, longtime listeners, triggered months of political chaos after he attempted to impose martial law late last year, which eventually resulted in his impeachment. As he takes the top job, Lee now faces the daunting task of not only uniting the country, but also balancing ties with its most important ally, the United States, under Donald Trump's unpredictable brand of diplomacy. Nice turn of phrase, BBC.
Yeah, they're good at that.
Yeah, that's just the briefest of overviews. There had been an impeachment of the replacement, and South Korea had cycled through a bunch of interim presidents. But because of the impeachment of Yoon, there was a 60-day deadline, and his impeachment was upheld by the court back in April, I think on the 4th, and so the election had to happen before June 4th, and it did. It's really kind of neat how that works.
Yeah,
democracy.
Exactly. And we might hope, and many people in South Korea do hope that this will draw a line under this whole episode of martial law and impeachment. I mean, I think Yoon still faces criminal charges, right? But that's, that won't have any impact on the political goings on, which I think people are very happy about. And I think people that might have been reluctant to support somebody like Yi, right, were persuaded to vote for him just so that the country could move on and take care of the very pressing business that awaits them. For example, during this entire time, right, when Yoon declared martial law, Donald Trump had already been elected president. And so, like every other country, South Korea, and even more than many other countries, has very important relations with the United States. And because they've had to deal with an interim government for months on end, nobody has been empowered to actually take part in discussions with the United States all the way through. So they've fallen behind on things like the trade discussion, the security environment in the Indo-Pacific. These are enormously important issues for South Korea that they've been politically unable to address. And so that's going to be job one for the new president.
Lee Jae-myung, he is from the Reform Party, and he defeats, I believe it was the Conservative Party, right? The People Power Party.
That's correct.
Yeah. Love how in Korea, or in South Korea, it's the People Power Party for the conservatives.
Well, John,
that's just my American parochialism, but
I understand it. But as I've told you, several times,
you have
right? Yeah. I mean, the name of the center-right party in Spain is the People's Party. The name of the center-right grouping in the entire European Union Parliament.
I understand.
The European People's Party.
Yes, right? But I'm from California, and all I can think of is People's Park.
I understand that, but after many times of me explaining to you that this is actually a rather common designation for
I think it bears repeating.
I
always think it bears repeating as we are gathering new listeners every week.
Okay, well, that's a fair point.
All right, let's talk about German Chancellor Merz at the White House. DW, the English language German news outlet, German Chancellor Merz said in his meeting with Donald Trump, he reminded the U.S. president that the two countries were, quote, now together in the duty to put more pressure, end of quote, on Russia to end its war in Ukraine. Speaking to DW shortly after his talk with Trump, Merz said he also reminded Trump that, quote, America was in charge globally to put pressure on those who were going to war, end of quotation. Merz referenced D-Day. He brought it up. And historic
event from World War II. Anniversary.
Yeah, it's D-Day. Yeah.
Right. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was 44. Never mind.
Yeah, correct. So it's the 81st. Yep. So DW says D-Day marked the first step in the Allied liberation of Europe and the defeat of Nazi Germany. DW. DW does not point out that President Trump then rather buffoonishly said, not a good day for your country. The New York Times did cover that. Merz did rebut, this is just me summarizing now, Merz did rebut Trump's assertion that D-Day was not good for Germany by saying, no, it was the start of being liberated from Nazi rule. Again, just our president should understand most Germans are happy they're no longer run by the Nazis. Don't you think?
I mean, most people should understand that. Our president, I don't know. Keep in mind that, and Merz actually made a point of mentioning this to Trump also, is that he brought with him a copy of the birth certificate of, I think, Trump's grandfather, right? Who was
You're an immigrant too, buddy.
That's right. And Trump's grandfather was born in Bavaria, right? And later, of course, much later, Bavaria would be the heartland of the Nazi Party, right? So, yeah, most presidents should understand that D-Day was the beginning of liberation from the Nazis. Maybe not this one. And so, look, we can hang our heads about that, and we probably ought to. But at this point, I don't think any of this should be surprising. But to go back to Friedrich Merz, right? People in Germany were viewing this meeting before it happened with some trepidation, right? Because everybody, I think, every world leader who's going to Washington fears being
Zelensky'd?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that over time that these fears might fade simply because Zelensky was actually in a particular situation, right? He was the enemy of somebody who Trump wants to be friends with. And so he was just, and by the way, it took a good half an hour before J.D. Vance really pounced upon Zelensky in that meeting, right? Trump didn't really seem to care to go after him. It was really Vance who started that ball rolling. And for, reasons that I think we can easily understand. Vance is, mega MAGA, right? He wants to really push this sort of anti-European agenda, much in the same vein as the European nationalist parties, whereas Trump is more sort of his own thing, I think, anyway. And then there was
Trump's plenty impressed by a lot of what Europe has to offer. He described things running in Germany as tippy-top during his conversation with Merz.
Yes, he's a German himself. You could understand how this might appeal to him, right? And then while we were on hiatus, we missed the appearance in the White House of South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who and it seemed as though Trump was trying to pull a Zelensky on him, but Ramaphosa was prepared. Right, he had with him white South African golfers who were able to sort of run interference for him, and so there was some trouble, right? But Ramaphosa seemed to come out of that meeting okay. But plenty of other people have done okay, right? Macron, Keir Starmer, Mark Carney, right?
Well, they kind of have the blueprint, and the Times talked about it. New York Times says Mr. Merz knew that Mr. Trump does not usually or does most of the talking with foreign counterparts. He did not fight the trend. Merz often sat silent for minutes as the president fielded questions. He welcomed Mr. Trump's praise of Germany and smiled through minor slights, like when Trump musing about whether it was a good idea for Germany to increase its military spending. God bless Chancellor Merz.
Well, Merz did not basically say, I'm sorry, I thought you wanted European nations to increase their military spending. Isn't that what you've been complaining about for years? But yeah, he didn't take the bait. But I think
it's all vibes, man. MAGA is all vibes.
There's a couple things. I think that if you're a world leader and you're going to Washington and you're going to the White House, you will probably be okay as long as you're not Ukrainian or black. And now in those cases, yeah, there might be some trouble, right? But the other thing in Merz's particular case is that he had help from two different people, one of whom was Xi Jinping, right, who finally did talk to Donald Trump on the phone earlier that same day for the first time in Trump's presidency this time around. Yeah. And some minor help earlier in the week from Vladimir Putin. So if Donald Trump actually were a stereotypical teenage girl, as I like to imagine him, this would be a fantastic diary week. He had phone calls with both.
That's a great point.
With both Xi and Putin. I mean, this never happens, right? And so he was probably in a pretty good mood. But the other person who helped out Friedrich Merz was Elon Musk, right? Because all the reporters really wanted to ask Trump about was not Germany or Friedrich Merz. They wanted to know about his phone call with Xi Jinping, and then they wanted to know about his deteriorating relationship with Elon Musk, which, by the way, was only in mid-deterioration at that point, when it spiraled onto social networking the next day. Now, we know that only good things happen on social networking. So we don't need to talk about this. I'm sure all of our listeners have heard endless commentary about this already. We don't need to add very much to it.
I have nothing to add to Musk v. Trump, although I read an internet comment that said it read an internet comment that I did not see that was referring to the very online falling out between Musk and Trump as the night of the long threads, which I thought was tremendous.
That's pretty good. But the thing is, this is just comedy gold, right? I mean, it's
and media gold.
Yeah, every aspect of this is so stupid.
So bitchy. It's so sordid. It's so petty.
It's wildly entertaining. Like I heard somebody refer to it as the Real Housewives of Mar-a-Lago or something, right?
That's very good.
The opportunities for jokes here are just endless. And I'm happy to say that it seems that this episode is over because
because if we're talking about this, more important things have already been
many
covered.
more important things are happening, right? And if we can put this to bed, I will be very pleased about that.
All right. Our next episode will be on Friday the 13th. Pretty spooky.
Yeah, that is spooky.
Yeah.
Hopefully nothing bad will happen before then, but I'll bet something will. But we'll see what we end up talking about next week. I think one thing I'd like to examine is the particulars of the trade dispute between the United States and China, which I think often gets lost in this whole sort of who called whom and sort of conflict of personality.
145% tariffs.
And all this sort of thing, right? Because there are very specific issues involved here that aren't really being addressed. Like Trump said 4 times yesterday that, we have a deal with China, which is not true, right? There's no indication that there's going to be, except for the fact that they actually did speak on the phone. And I think we can see that escalating the trade war just isn't in either country's interest. So there will probably be some accommodation reached, but it's not going to be soon, and I don't think it's going to be easy. So we might talk about things like the rare earth minerals, for that matter, right, which is very serious sticking point in these negotiations. And also the reciprocal ban on exporting of chips to China, right? And I think these are the sort of very specific but very large issues that seldom get discussed in all this conversation about the trade war.
All right, next week we'll talk about that. If nothing else more pressing explodes,
other things will also happen, but we don't know exactly what those will be.
Well, everybody have a great weekend. For Sam, I'm John. Peace.
Thank you.